With the clock ticking toward Election Day, how much voter uncertainty remains? The Supreme Court clears the way for a consensus on casinos and voter ID, just two of the issues that could bring Arkansans to the polls, or maybe keep them away. The down ballot is 2018 a rebuilding year for the Democrats as well as the Razorbacks. The race for governor, a dozen campaigns, a handful of ballot issues, uncertain turnout. The party chairs consider it all next on Arkansas Week.
Local broadcast of Arkansas Week is made possible in part by the award-winning Arkansas Democrat-Gazette, Arkansas's largest major newspaper, bringing you local, national, and international news since 1819. By the Arkansas Times, keeping you informed by covering people, events, and politics in Arkansas. By FM 89, KUAR in Little Rock, with in-depth news reporting, analysis, and discussion each weekday.
Hello again, everyone. Thanks for joining us. Doubtless you're aware it's been debate week here on AETN. 8, count them, 8 debates in the races for statewide office and congressional seats. Our series concluded when the 3 nominees for governor took the stage. In a moment, we'll hear from the 3 party chairs about that campaign and the others. But first, it's fair to say the marquee contest this year has been in the 2nd Congressional District, where incumbent Republican French Hill faces a spirited challenge from Democrat Clark Tucker and Libertarian Ryan Swafford. It was a rather less contentious debate than many people anticipated. For example, a fairly understated exchange over ballot and election security and Russian interference.
According to the president's own national security advisor, there's incontrovertible evidence that Russia interfered in the 2016 election. Whether that had an effect on the outcome of the election or not is immaterial. The fact is that they did intend and inflict damage to the process of the election in 2016. There were some sanctions placed against Russia earlier this year. I don't think Russia is really feeling those sanctions. That's a positive first step, but we absolutely have to do more to sanction Russia for interfering in the 2016 election. But quite frankly, the more important point is that we do everything in our power to protect the election system moving forward.
Well, first on this issue of protecting our own elections in this country and what Congress has done or not done, Congress has appropriated $386 million, which I voted to support, and $4 million of that comes to Arkansas for election security. This is money that's essential. It was a bipartisan vote. Democrats and Republicans support election security after what we've seen in the 16 election and what we've read about and seen in testimony that Facebook, for example, has delivered before the Congress.
The integrity of elections. I wish that the Democrats and Republicans thought so when it came to foreign countries, because of how much we actually intervene in those countries and how much we manipulate everyone else's elections. It was nice to finally see them show some integrity on that issue. I hate that it came down to such a bloodbath over simple semantics, but I do think that our cybersecurity needs to be intact.
And returning to the program to kick these things around, some familiar faces, Republican Party Chair Doyle Webb, Dr. Michael Pakko, the chair of the Libertarian Party in Arkansas, and State Representative Michael Gray, the chair of the Democratic State Committee, Democratic Party in Arkansas. Gents, thanks for coming in. Any surprises in any of you all? Come on, don't tell me you didn't watch all 8 of them. Any surprises?
No, unfortunately it played out just as I think what we've seen the last few cycles. You had good Democratic candidates on the stage offering ideas and solutions and visions from the future, and for the most part we heard Hillary Clinton, Nancy Pelosi, Washington Liberal, all of those things referenced, and been winning with that, so I guess you stay on that horse that brought you. But at some point, I think Arkansans, that's been a little unfair and dishonest with Arkansans. I think they want to hear what we're going to do and what solutions are, and less boogeymen in the closet kind of speak. So I wanted to be surprised, but unfortunately I wasn't.
Let me quickly add to that. You know, I believe that when you see the Republican nominee for governor and attorney general and on down the ticket, you see people that have delivered on their promises. Promises made, promises delivered. Over the last 3 years, Arkansas has had and experienced the largest tax reduction in its state's history. We've had the lowest unemployment in state's history. That's after 140 years of Democrat rule. The Republican government brought that to this state.
Michael Pakko. All right. Well,
let me say on behalf of all the Libertarian candidates how much we appreciate AETN's sponsorship of these debates. It really is truly a public service, and we're delighted to participate in it. I think overall our candidates had an opportunity to reach the public in ways that they often don't get an opportunity to, and I thought it was a good week for Arkansas voters to be able to hear the differences among the three parties.
Well, I mean, in terms of the substance of what you heard.
Well, there were no big surprises. I think everyone knows where the Republicans and Democrats stand. I think the Libertarians had an opportunity to bring their smaller government message to the voters through this forum, and I think that's what the takeaway is for our perspective.
Back to John Michael Gray.
Just 140 years of Democratic control. I just want to make sure we remember Governor Huckabee was in there for 10 years, and the Democratic Party's not claiming him. So I want to make sure that we don't forget that little blip in the radar there. And
well, you had Wynn Rockefeller, and that's 134. I think.
Well,
I don't know that
Wynn
Wynn
still
Rockefeller
had
would
a
be a
Democrat
Republican
legislature.
today.
Democrat legislature.
All right.
We would take Governor Rockefeller.
What did anything that you heard alter the dynamic in any way of this election? Now, we started out with a clip there from the 2nd Congressional District debate. Yeah. Anything changed?
Steve, I didn't see
because of
anything.
that one and any other.
I'm like the other two gentlemen. I think that people may have gotten to know the candidates better. I don't think there were any surprises. I think they just expressed their positions well, and I think we go on with the election that starts next week.
Tom,
I think in closing, when you saw Cart Tucker look into the camera and talk about running a campaign on inspiration and not fear and hope for the future, here's a guy with 2 young kids that could stay in a Little Rock law firm and make a pretty good life for himself, but he knows the future needs to be better than just talking points and doing nothing and blaming it on the other guy. So I think Cart's introduction to people that may not have seen him until the debates was well presented, and I think he made a good case for why people of the 2nd District should send him to Washington.
Michael Pakko.
Well, I think having a third party on the stage also helps clarify, give more options. Oftentimes our candidates, Libertarians that is, come off sounding a little bit less polished perhaps than the other guys, and that's because we don't have career politicians running for office. They're ordinary citizens up there expressing their desires for a different kind of government in Arkansas, and I think it makes for a more informative debate when it's not just the two parties at each other's throats, pounding heads.
We talked about the 2nd Congressional District off the top of the program, but there's 3 other seats in play too. And with a president who is presumed to be, the latest surveys I saw anyway, in Arkansas, a president that's presumed to be still very popular, yet not a little controversial. Does that alter things in any way for those 3 nominees?
You know, in the past
4, actually.
Well, the past 2 weeks, we've seen Republican intensity in the state increase, and particularly in the areas where the president is popular. We've seen more Republicans get excited about the races, and we feel that those hearings concerning the Supreme Court were beneficial in the state of Arkansas to move our base.
Well, on the Democratic side, though.
So I think what you saw with the with all 4 congressionals, but we talked about the 2nd, was you saw good people that care about the areas that they want to represent, that came and presented ideas and hopes for the future and did a really good job. Josh, Hayden, and Chinton all did a very good job. They knew they were in tough uphill climbs when they got in these races. I think a lot of people that got to see them this week understood that theirs was an honest passion, and that it is not just a trip back to Washington to blame it on the other guy. So they knew that it's a tough hill to climb. We know the climate we're in, but I think any party would be proud to have people like that running.
Oh, let me throw this out here, and that's the role of women, particularly in this coming election, where you've had all manner of scandals. sexual abuse. The Me Too movement has risen, and then on top of that, the Kavanaugh hearings.
You know, I think that women will split out like they normally split out with the candidates. I believe that if we go back to the Kavanaugh hearings, I believe there were women that believed the doctor, and I believe there were women that believed Judge Kavanaugh. I certainly respect the doctor for coming forward. I think she was put in an untenable situation by it not being handled by Senator Feinstein in the way that it should have been handled privately, to have the investigation done before she was put in a very difficult situation. But we go back to the election. I believe that in Arkansas that there will be women who vote for Republican candidates, and there will be women that will vote for Democrat candidates, and I don't believe that sways the electorate.
You don't see a gender
all.
shift?
I do not see a gender shift in Arkansas.
John Michael?
So I think that women of Arkansas, women in the United States, but particularly in Arkansas, are independent thinkers. I don't think there is a movement afoot one way or the other to tend to agree with Chairman Webb there, but to say, I think that looking to the genuineness of the candidate and seeing what they're really talking about and hope for the future for their kids and their families, I think the women of Arkansas are doing what every Arkansan always should, and what we used to do a lot more of was look to the heart and soul of that candidate and a lot less to the party by their name.
So,
yeah, there's a lot of variables involved in the turnout and how that will affect the election. I think the women's vote is perhaps a little bit more in play than it has been in recent elections, simply because of the issues that have come up. And but I think an important factor is also going to be the youth vote. Are we reaching the young voters of this state? And that's one of the hopes that we have, is that we can bring up a new generation of voters that recognize that there's more than just two parties, and will vote accordingly.
well, there could be three parties disappointed then, because over the decades, each political party has reached for young voters, younger voters, and more often than not been disappointed, at least in terms of turnout.
So but I want to add to it, while we may not see a gender movement at the ballot box, we have definitely seen it at filing. And the Democratic Party is full of young, dynamic mothers, professional women who are fed up with the way things are being run, from Northwest Arkansas all the way down to South Arkansas. And in fact, in the primary, we doubled the number of women in the Democratic caucus in the House, with three outstanding members. And we look forward to seeing what those female candidates will be able to do here in a month.
Let me go. Did you want to?
Yeah, I want to say that I think that women have been motivated, and I celebrate the fact that women are motivated to serve in public office. We have seen great women in our party having elected the first woman to the office of Attorney General, to a non-traditionally female role. And I celebrate that movement in Arkansas, and I think it falls on both sides. There are Democrats and Republicans and maybe a few Libertarians that are motivated to serve.
What do you make, though, of that low primary turnout back a few months ago?
Well, I didn't see a low primary turnout in the Republican primary. We had a 10% increase in our
overall,
primary. Okay?
overall enrollment or participation.
I think you'd have to ask Michael John why the Democrat turnout went down.
Oh, Mr. Chairman, I think that's unfair to say. I think it was low for Arkansas, period. Mr. Barnes, I think people are just tired. I think they're tired of what they're seeing in Washington, whether you regardless of which side of the argument you fell on during the Judge Kavanaugh's nomination. I think we saw the worst of politics there. I think people are tired. I think they're frustrated. They're tired of hearing the same old, same old. They get talking point followed by talking point followed by talking point, and really are I think that falls on the leaders of the parties, the political leaders, to give a fresh look and look to solutions and ideas that can get Arkansans excited. And I think what you saw was not an excited electorate. I think you saw people that traditionally vote in primaries, but no increase. And so when only 30% of Arkansas votes, that means we're doing something wrong.
Well, I think there's a limitation on the choices that confront the voters when it comes to the primaries or the general election. Here we are coming into November where we're choosing our legislature. Over 50% of the House and Senate are already predetermined. They're uncontested races. Now, libertarians are trying to help out there. We're contesting 8 races that otherwise wouldn't have an opponent. But when there's not very many choices in the ballot, that's going to limit the motivation of voters to come out and take their stand.
Well, let's look down ballot for just a second. Doyle, what?
Well, go ahead.
Well, the question was, in terms of rebuilding, you're trying to do that at the legislative level, certainly, this season. And in a curious corner of the state, I guess.
The 3rd congressional district in Northwest Arkansas has got to be one of the most dynamic congressional districts in the United States right now, certainly in the South. Now, I'm from the Delta and fond of the Delta, and it will always be where my heart is, but we can't ignore what's going on up there. The influx of new people, the progressive economy up there, the things they are doing that just wouldn't have been done in Fayetteville or Bentonville and Rogers when I was in college up there. Bentonville still had gravel roads. It is just a whole new world up there. And so the candidates we're seeing, while may not all win, I think are really plowing the ground and laying the groundwork for the future.
Our people are very strong in Northwest Arkansas, too. It is such a dynamic place. A couple of our strongest legislative candidates are from the Northwest area. In Benton County, we're running a full slate of Justice of the Peace candidates, so we could actually make an influence on the quorum court in that county. So it is a place where things are happening, and that's where we're seeing growth, I think, perhaps in all 3 parties for that matter.
Doyle Webb, you see a shift in the demographics up in the 3rd district, particularly in the Northwest,
You know,
northwest corner.
it's clearly a growing part of the state, but our Republicans have served well up there. And why do you run against someone who has served well? I don't know. I've just spent a couple of days
Ideology,
up there.
maybe. But
Yeah, maybe.
I just went to jail, right?
I
So,
have-
I mean, you'd run against those guys.
Michael John lives in a different Arkansas than I live in, obviously, because I see good things going on in Arkansas. I see people proud that the income tax is coming down. I see them proud because unemployment is going down. They're proud of their educational opportunities. Mothers are happy that their children may actually stay in Arkansas. But I see great gains, continuing gains for us in the legislature. We may win 2 or 3 seats, we may lose 2 or 3 seats, but the legislature will look substantially like it does today because it's been a good legislature that has delivered the will of the people.
Well, I live in an Arkansas that I love. And if you love something, you're able to point out where we've got problems. And I don't attribute it to any one administration, but it's time to fix it and quit blaming it on anyone else. And I certainly wouldn't think that Nancy Pelosi or any Washington politicians outside Arkansas, but I can tell you, we live in a state where the teachers need to be paid more, where we have towns who don't have access to medical care, people who have to wait 30 minutes on an ambulance, people who are working hard to send their kids to college knowing that there's no opportunity for their kid to ever come home if they get that college degree. A lot of them are having to move out of state. I love this place. There are a lot of good things, but we can always do better.
Well, in my recent travels, gentlemen, what I've found are a lot of Arkansas people are mad as H because of one thing or another, and a lot of it's legislative scandals. Some of it boils over into the executive, but now the judicial as well. And I don't know whether that's going to produce anger or indifference at the ballot box.
I don't think that it will end up having much effect. As I tell people, I want us to look at the good legislators. We have 135 legislators. Yes, 7 people have been convicted or charged, but that leaves 128 that have not. These are public servants, have done a good job, who leave their families to try and make Arkansas a better place. And it's time that we start celebrating those public servants as well. It all started in the Garden of Eden. I go back to that, okay? Two people that God created who were perfect, even there was a fall in the Garden of Eden.
Well, it's an argument against eating fruit.
There you go.
I appreciate
Ought
the
to stick with
chairman's endorsement
soybeans.
of those of us honest in the legislature. I appreciate that. I think he's right. There are good people on both sides in the legislature. I wouldn't say that corruption is one party or the other, and I didn't mean to suggest that. I just said that the reason you're seeing people run in Northwest Arkansas because we've had those issues up there with ecclesia and things of that nature in the present term. The whether we'll see gains, whether we'll see a major shift, those polls will be November 6th, and we'll see how it turns out. But I do think that Arkansans, whether they're angry or indifferent, I think that Governor Hutchinson and Governor Beebe had the advantage of the Affordable Care Act and be able to take Medicaid expansion that a lot of my colleagues campaigned against until they got there and realized how important it was to our budget. And so Arkansas hasn't had to feel the pain that an Oklahoma or Louisiana or Kansas or Kentucky's had to feel, thanks to the Affordable Care Act and Medicaid expansion in Arkansas.
Michael Pakko.
Well, I'd just like to point out that I agree with the point he made about that the corruption is not one party or the other. It's both. It's the entire system. And I hope that Arkansans consider other options in this election and as we move forward.
Well, one of the options they'll have come November is to decide some ballot issues, and just this past week, Supreme Court said, yeah, go ahead, let's vote on casinos. Will that have any impact? You want to gamble one way or the other on the vote?
I don't want to be in the lottery on this, okay? But I don't know. I know that Pope County has actually required it to be a referendum in their county. If the initiative should pass, the people are still going to have to vote on it there. So we'll wait and see. The last poll I saw, it was still under 50%. It may make it over 50%, but we'll see.
Yeah.
I don't think it drives people to the polls one way or the other. In recent times, when casino amendments have been suggested, you've seen big movements either by the out-of-state interest in keeping casinos out of Arkansas, or you've seen big movements by social conservative groups. I haven't seen them really weighing in on the casino issue this time, so I don't see whether they're for or against. I don't see that a big movement to the polls over that issue.
Yeah, generally speaking, I don't think that the initiatives bring people to the polls. There are some that do motivate voters, and perhaps one that might have was the term limits that will not be on the ballot or votes counted. So, but other than that, I think it's really the personalities and the candidates that create the turnout.
Chairman, I don't want to correct you, but that hasn't been decided yet on term limits.
Well,
The master said it shouldn't be on the ballot, but the Supreme Court won't rule on that till next Thursday, it's my understanding. Okay?
So we're still waiting
We're still a
from
week
the
away
Supreme
from
Court.
Don't mean to
Well,
correct you, but, yeah.
well, good. I hope that we see that.
So,
there we go. But we also have this voter ID, which has been an extremely
I'm pleased
hot
that
issue.
that issue has now been settled
Yeah.
with the Supreme Court, even though the constitutional amendment that was referred out will still be on the ballot for people to vote on. It's obvious that, to buy cigarettes or tobacco or to get into a federal installation or get on an airplane, you've got to show a photo ID. So hopeful that will make people feel that our election process is more honest and more credible, and I think that's an important thing that they have now approved that.
Chairman Gray?
You know, I think this has been a battle fought for 10 years in Arkansas. It started as a political wedge issue that got some traction, that works at every coffee shop in Arkansas. It's hard to make the argument in a soundbite setting against it, other than we really haven't had a problem with voter fraud in Arkansas. However, I think the Supreme Court came down, said that that it was valid, will be on the ballot. I think the voters of Arkansas will pass it. And I don't think that'll be the end of it. I think we'll see some protracted court battles, but I think this is something that moves into the judicial system where things like this get sorted out and off the plate of the General Assembly.
I thought that our candidate for Secretary of State, Christopher Olson, put it very well when he pointed out that that the kind of voter fraud that voter ID is supposed to address isn't really all that common. That we need to be more concerned about other flaws in our electoral process, other vulnerabilities in the ballot process. So I think it's much ado about nothing, to tell you the truth.
Yeah, I think the bigger problem is how do we get more Arkansans to vote? When we have a state of 3 million people and only 30% of the registered voters are voting, then getting more people to participate, I think, is a bigger problem. I think that's what we ought to be figuring out.
Well, as I mentioned earlier, I found an awful lot of jaundice in recent weeks just traveling around the state.
Once again, I'd like more people to participate, but I'd like for more people to go to church, and more people to be in Rotary, and more people be involved in the community. And we're just in a time in which people are withdrawing from being involved. And I think we've got to change that mentality that it is important to be involved in your community, and part of being involved is voting. Voting. So it's going to take a mind change, not only in Arkansas, but in the nation. To do that.
The three chairmen, thanks very much for being on the program. We're simply out of time. Thanks to you for watching. See you next week.
Local broadcast of Arkansas Week is made possible in part by the award-winning Arkansas Democrat-Gazette, Arkansas's largest major newspaper, bringing you local, national, and international news since 1819. By the Arkansas Times, keeping you informed by covering people, events, and politics in Arkansas. By FM 89, KUAR in Little Rock, with in-depth news reporting, analysis, and discussion each weekday.